Skipping reminds me of the time that I had to skip town. You see, my friend Steve Gillis, he got into one of his frequent barroom fights and badly beat up a bartender. I signed a $500 bail bond to keep Steve out of jail for a time. Steve fled back to Virginia City. He had found out that the bartender he had beat up was a close friend of the chief of police of Briscoe, and he decided it was not going to be good for his health to stay in town. And Steve urged me to get out of town too. But instead of going to Virginia City, instead of going back there, I went up into the foothills to where Steve's brother Jim lived in a cabin. He was a gold prospector up there. While I was up there on Jackass Hill, place had that name before I got there, I heard an interesting story told by a man named Ben Coon from Illinois who had been a riverboat pilot, but now he was tending bar at a hotel over in Angels Camp, over in Calaveras County. I'll try to tell it the way I remember him telling it, with his same use of words and peculiarities of speech. Try to picture yourself there. This was the winter of '64 or '65. It was a cold and rainy day in Angels Camp. And Ben was standing behind his bar, and there were patrons of the bar sitting on stools and here and there, and I was over by the stove trying to keep warm with a glass of sarsaparilla or something. And Ben told this story something like this. This is how I remember it. Simon Wheeler was a good deal of a talker. He wore out 3 sets of false teeth talking. Simon had a friend named Jim Smiley. Jim Smiley was the curiousest man about betting on anything that come up that you ever see, if he could get anybody to bet on the other side. And if he couldn't, he'd change sides. As long as he got a bet, he was satisfied. One day, Smiley caught the frog. He said that he was going to learn that frog how to jump. He calculated he would do that no matter how long it took. And he sat in his backyard and learned that frog how to jump. Indeed, he did. That frog, to jump on the dead level, could beat any other frog. Nobody came close to him. He could lay over any other frog in the profession. And Smiley broke all the camps around there betting on that frog. By and by, he had a misfortune. He used to keep his frog in a little lattice box. The frog's name was Daniel Webster. He would take that box and go downtown and lay for a bet. One day, a stranger came up and he said, "What might it be that you've got in that box?" Smiley said, "Well, it might be a polecat. It might be a pile of gold nuggets. But it ain't. It's only just a frog." And the stranger said, "Well, what's he good for?" Smiley said, "Well, I don't know. I know one thing though. He can out-jump any frog in Calaveras County." That stranger, he took that box, turned it this way and that. He examined Daniel Webster all over very critically. Then he handed the box back and he said, "I don't see any points about that frog that's any better than any other frog." "Oh," Smiley said, "it may be that you understand frogs, and it may be that you're only just an amateur, so to speak. Anyway, I will risk $40 that he can out-jump any frog in Calaveras County." That stranger, he looked sad, sorrowful, grieved him. said, I'm only a stranger in camp, and I ain't got no frog. But if I had a frog, I would bet you. Smiley says, that's all right. That's all right. You hold my frog, and I will go get you a frog. So Smiley led out to the swamp. Meanwhile, the stranger was standing there waiting. He was holding the box with Daniel in it. He was waiting and waiting the longest time. Finally, he took out Daniel Webster from the box, pried his mouth open, and took a teaspoonful and filled him full of quail shot, filled him up to the chin, set him down on the floor. Daniel sat there. Meanwhile, Smiley flopped around in the swamp for about half an hour. Finally, he touched the frog and brought it back to this fella, and he said, Smiley said, put that frog down on the floor with his front paws just even with Daniel's. And when I give the word, they'll jump. 1, 2, 3, scoop. And they touched up the frog from behind to indicate the time was called. And that new frog, he rose like a rocket and came down kerchunk, a yard and a half from where he had started. A perfectly elegant jump for a non-professional that way. The Smiley's frog gave a heave or two with his shoulders. His ambition was up, but it was no use. He couldn't budge. He was stuck there solid as an anvil. Well, the stranger took the money, and as he was walking away, he looked over his shoulder and he said, I don't see any points about that frog that's any better than any other frog. And Smiley, he looked down at Daniel Webster. I never see a man look so puzzled. He says, I do wonder what that frog throwed off for. There must be something the matter with him. Looks mighty baggy somehow. He hefted him and said, blame my cats if you don't weigh 5 pounds. Turned him over and showered out a hatful of shot. And Simon Wheeler said, let that be a lesson to you. And I say, let that be a lesson to you too, because do not ever put too much faith in the passing stream. As long as I stuck to reporting, I didn't get into too much trouble too often. But when I was given a little more rope, such as had happened when I worked as a printer on various papers around the country, sometimes I almost hung myself with it. You see, in time I became chief editor of the Territorial Enterprise. I only lasted a week at that post. I edited that paper 6 days, and then I had 5 duels on my hands. I wouldn't have minded that if the other people were to challenge me. I would have simply declined with thanks, but that's not how it was. If you abused the man of the paper, if you called him names, they didn't have such laws back there as we do now. You had to challenge him and shoot him if he didn't like what you had printed about him. Well, I didn't want to do that, but the publisher said it was the custom. Society had to be protected. And if I couldn't do the duties of my position, he would have to hire somebody else. This man I was supposed to challenge to a duel got touched. It's something I wrote about him. I don't remember now exactly what it was. I may have called him a thief or a grave robber or something. He fought very shy of me at first, but that made me ply him with more challenges, more bloodthirsty challenges all the more. Finally, he began to take an interest in this thing. It seemed like he was going to take part in it at last. The boys were excited about this, but I was not. It was not a turn in things that I was expecting. I had taken for my second a fiery, peppery little fellow named Steve Gillis. I'll tell more about Steve and his brother Jim later. But Steve was all fired up to get this thing taken care of right away. So he took me into a ravine outside of town to practice. It was a custom back then to fight at 5 steps with Colt's revolvers. We had borrowed a stable door for Mark from a gentleman who was absent. We set up that stable door, put a fence rail in the middle of it, and then a squash on top of it to represent his head. I had no luck at it. I could not hit the rail, and I could not hit the squash. And then when I found out I could not hit the door either, I started to get a little discouraged. But then, when I found I crippled one of the boys occasionally, I thought it was not so bad. I was dangerous with a pistol, just not reliable. About this time, we heard some shooting going on the other side of the ridge. We knew what that was. The other party was practicing. I didn't feel comfortable. If they were to come over the ridge, they might see what was going on, and when they saw no bullet hole in the barn door, that might be too much encouragement for them. Just then, a little bird, a little larger than a sparrow, lit on the sagebrush nearby. Steve whipped out his pistol and shot his head off. The boys picked it up, and we were talking about it when the other party came over the ridge. My adversary's second came up, and he said, "How far off was that?" Steve said, "About 30 steps. "Who did that?" "Why, Twain, of course." "Did he not? Can he do that often?" "He could do that about 4 times out of 5. I knew that little rascal was lying, but I didn't like to say so. I was that kind of man that didn't like to be too frank or too familiar in a matter such as that. But it was a comfort to see those other fellows' underjaws drop and turn blue about the gills and look sick. They went off, took their man home, and when I got home, I got a little note from those parties peremptorily declining the fight. How sore the boys were, how indignant they were, and so was I. But I was not distressed about it. I thought I could stand it, perhaps. But then something happened that changed my life. We received word that Nevada had just passed a law that made dueling, or even challenging someone to a duel, a penitentiary offense. Not only for the principals, but also for the seconds. That it was to be strictly enforced, and unless we got out of town in a limited number of hours, an example was to be made of us. So just as my piloting days had ended because of the outbreak of war, my Nevada days ended because of an aborted duel. Steve and I left on the stagecoach for San Francisco, outrageous and rollicking city full of bohemians.